Welcome to NucleCast, the official podcast of the ANWA Deterrence Center. Each week, we bring you leading experts for a lively discussion on topics related to strategic nuclear deterrence. Our host is Dr. Adam Lowther, Director of Strategic Programs at the National Strategic Research Institute. The views of the hosts and the guests are their own.
Welcome back to another exciting episode of NucleCast. Of course, as always, I am your host, Adam Lowther, and today we have a great guest with us. Of course, that is David Campbell. He is the Executive Vice President for EnergySolutions, and he's got, if you don't know David, he's got about 30 years of experience in the nuclear industry, everything from defense programs to waste to congressional and communications. It's a pretty broad background. And today we wanted to talk about some of those early days in NNSA's history, and particularly that sort of transition period from the Bush administration to the Obama administration, where we realized that the reliable replacement warhead and RNEP were not going to make it, and we were going to have to modernize. And how was that transition and what was happening at NNSA at that point? And then we want to also talk about cleanup and what all we're doing. And this is a topic we've never discussed on NucleCast. So what are we doing at Los Alamos? And, what are we doing around the country to make sure that as we plan for modernization and new facilities, that we're doing what it takes to maintain environmentally friendly approach to this, and that we're not putting anybody at risk. And as David pointed out, nuclear is the only industry that knows where every ounce of its waste is gone. So that's a great point. With that long introduction, David, welcome to NucleCast.
Thanks, Adam. Great to be here.
So let's go back. I know your career goes back to like 1989-ish, but I want to sort of go to that midway point in about 2007 when you left industry, came to NNSA, and you came in part because RRW was not going to make its way through Congress, and we had to do something different. Can you give us the background of that period and sort of how we got on track for the current modernization program we're on?
Sure, absolutely. So my history is a little bit different than many of your guests because I've been in and out of the defense side, for quite a bit, although still related. But back in those days, I was actually working for an environmental company, both, core work and DOE work and all that sort of stuff. But I was still very engaged with the industry, still very engaged with DOE and with my old NNSA colleagues. I had started my career in defense programs as a contractor, but at headquarters, knew many of the senior execs and all that sort of stuff. And so what happened was, coming in on the end of 2006, 2007, it was pretty clear RRW wasn't going to move forward. There was a drive within NNSA, recognition amongst the whole defense establishment that things had to happen on the modernization side of things. But they just hadn't done a great job in selling the program. So there was an initiative by Bill Barker, who was chief of staff at the time. He unfortunately passed away in the fall, but he was one of my mentors. I knew Tom DiAgostino, who was slated to become the undersecretary at the time. I was involved in a lot of political stuff. So I got reached out, had to go through the White House type of process. But, they needed someone to come in and help them communicate, work the Hill, work the interagency activities to really come up with a program of selling why they needed to modernize, even in a time when they were negotiating the New START agreements, which eventually happened in 2010. So it was kind of this, we need to modernize while we're reducing our
Right.
stockpile, right?
Yeah.
So it was an interesting nuance that we had to go through.
And so what did you end up doing as far as how did you overcome this challenging period?
So what we did is, I came in and had there was a great team of people there. You had, you had some guests on before who were involved with the program. So we had a good team in place. Again, Tom D'Agostino was just coming as he was already defense programs. He was the head of defense programs, but he had been nominated and was going through the confirmation process to be NA1. Bill Ostendorf was there. So what we did is really try to keep it simple. We had to sort of go on a campaign and on a road show to really try to get the committees in Congress on board with why you needed to do this. The other thing we did, I think, differently, and I think happens a lot more now, but wasn't really happening at the time, was getting DOD involved. DOD's relationship with the Armed Services Committees and with the Appropriations Committees was very different than DOE's. And so, I remember, in a couple of iterations of meetings, getting beat up pretty good by folks on the Hill about certain things. And I'm like, why are we taking this? We are providing a service to DOD. DOD has the requirement. We're here trying to fulfill their requirement. So that initiated a lot of interaction and ultimately joint appearances, joint testimony between, General Chilton at the time, who was head of Stratcom, and Tom D'Agostino. And so we really went more on a campaign of why this was needed. So that there was that aspect to it. The other is you had to put in place the formal sort of what I'd call the executable documentation that allowed you to do the things you needed to do to the facilities, the environmental impact statements, all that sort of stuff.
Well, you mentioned environmental impact statements, and this is one of the things. So in previous guests we've had, and we just had Mike Schultz, who is the acting deputy chief of staff for A10. And one of the things he said was that we can't really move any faster in this modernization effort. And so as I've thought about it, and we've had other guests, I've often wondered, is, like the environmental side of it and some of the safety side of it, is it where it needs to be? Is it overly onerous? Is it an impediment to, as we watch the Chinese, for example, are going to quintuple the size of their arsenal, and the Russians, they have a substantial tactical advantage over us, and the Iranians may go nuclear, and then the North Koreans are saying they're going to be our peer, and we're not really making progress particularly quickly, and everything's getting slipped. And I just wonder, what are those impediments that are keeping us from being able to move faster and to build the facilities and the capabilities we need?
There are many. One is our system. We give everyone a voice, as we should, but that drives some, collaboration, delays, and inclusion, which is hard to, it's hard to do things speedy when that's sort of a cultural part of our country. Obviously politics is part of it too. Funding is part of it. What we were dealing with back then was you had to have sort of in government, there's the policy, but then you have the National Environmental Policy Act. You have to have done the assessments to at least convince the public and other policymakers and the Hill that what the implications of your actions are going to be. And we were doing it comprehensive wide. There's a whole different, tons of different types of documents you can do, but we were trying to essentially do one that said this is to modernize the entire complex. So we were dealing with how do we, what are we going to do about special nuclear materials at Livermore versus Los Alamos versus here? Because emissions were changing, Nevada test site, things like that. And then we were also proposing building new things. We were talking about the CMRR at Los Alamos and where were we going to do the pits? Was it going to be Los Alamos or Savannah River? You had to think about all these things when you were decades out from actually doing them. And so that had initiated before I got there, but as happens in government, it was kind of just lagging along. And so probably the one thing that I brought best that helped it was kind of a little bit of a commercial, project execution, get things done approach where, really try to get the understanding, drive, the organizations within NNSA that were responsible for performing and putting these documents together to really go get it done. You have to have public meetings. You have to do all this sort of stuff. You have to engage with stakeholders. So it was really about getting a schedule to go get it all done, do the analysis, get the labs, get the production facilities on board with, what they thought their mission was, and all that sort of stuff. So it's just a comprehensive, labor intensive exercise to get all these done.
Yeah. And that sort of brings me to the present, I guess, in terms of as this modernization program is underway and we're trying to build new facilities at all of the weapons labs. And part of what you do now is clean up these facilities. And I wonder, as you were to, many of our listeners may not necessarily be expert in, nuclear cleanup. So they know very little about it. And there may be, average Americans who listen to the podcast and wonder, how dangerous are these facilities that, they've heard horror stories about Rocky Flats and they wonder, should we be building new pits at Los Alamos and should, Savannah River and, what are the environmental ramifications and, it's not World War II anymore. Can you sort of create a picture for folks as to what these, concerns, environmental implications, what are they really? What is the ground truth?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying you mentioned Rocky Flats and people who are concerned and, we have plenty of history for people to be concerned. I mean, we didn't always do things right. But the beauty of Rocky Flats is Rocky Flats no longer exists. It shows you can actually solve the problem, which we did as a nation, and a number of other sites just like that. Particularly when you're dealing with the weapons side of the program, commercial nuclear, power is more simple. We're dealing with spent fuel. You're dealing with some byproducts. You kind of know what it is. It's very controllable and everything else. The weapons mission's a little bit different. Similar nuclear stuff. But because we're, we also deal with interesting, intricate, weird stuff too, right? Because, the LEP programs, right? You have to, there's materials in there, classified materials, things like that, that are challenging. So from a radioactivity perspective, yeah, it's, there's concern and, you have to manage it safely. You have to have the appropriate engineered controls in place, the appropriate systems to protect you and all that. And we have all that. Certainly today we, as opposed to maybe the 40s and 50s and early 60s when there was a rush to get all this done, we know where everything is. We know how to manage it. We know, what type of containers to put it in. We know all that sort of stuff. We know what systems to use to protect the workforce, all that. The biggest challenge in nuclear is, we as a country, we haven't decided, where to put it,
Right.
But once you have it in casks, you have it stabilized, it's stabilized. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to leak. Low level waste is easily dealt with. We deal with that. My company in particular, we're the leaders in low level waste management. We have facilities that dispose of these things. The biggest challenge for a place like Los Alamos, for instance, is as they try to modernize is to what degree and how quickly can they clear out space to build new facilities where they're trying to clear out, their existing space. They don't have a lot of just extra space lying around. That becomes the biggest challenge in dealing with waste. You have to pull it out. You got to clean it up. You got to have a place to put it. A lot of the stuff coming out of Los Alamos is transuranic waste. There's, the WIP facility in New Mexico is where it's intended to be housed, but you got to deal with the waste first before you can ship it. So it's a logistical challenge more than we don't know what we're doing challenge. It's just, is there enough money to do it? Are there enough people to do it? Do we have enough time to do it? Type of thing.
Yeah. So when we're at that time where we got to take a quick break, but when we come back, could you give us sort of a sense of what it means to clean up these older facilities like, Los Alamos is a great example, or Savannah River, and sort of what is that process from sort of end to end so that our listeners can create a mental image of what actually happens? So you're listening to NucleCast. We're talking to David Campbell, and we'll be right back. This episode of NucleCast is brought to you by the ANWA Deterrence Center, whose mission is to educate Americans about the nuclear enterprise and strategic deterrence. And we're back. We're talking to David Campbell, and he was just going to create a mental picture for all of us as to what it means to clean up these facilities so that, as he mentioned before the show, so that you can reuse facilities and put new equipment in them. And so what exactly does that look like?
Well, it's a complex process and involves a lot of planning, a lot of logistics, a lot of understanding of what you're dealing with. If you're cleaning up an old facility, the first thing is, you have to be able to characterize the facility. You have to understand not only what wastes are there that you need to get out, but what is the facility contaminated with itself? The walls, the ground, the soil underneath. Do you tear down the whole facility? Can you reuse the facility? So there's a lot of planning, and that planning takes a long time. Because you're also trying to establish, the budgets for this and get approval for it. So there's an art and there's a dance that happens here that, and there's competing priorities and things of that nature. So the characterization and the planning is the first part. Then it's a matter of establishing, the government in this side of the nuclear space. They oversee things, but it's all contractors who do it. So you gotta, the government has to drive the contractors to have the right contracts, to make sure the right amount of money is there to budget for these things. You have to know where the waste is going to go. Most of the waste, I'd say 80% of it, there is an ability, there is a defined pathway for those wastes to be disposed of, to be treated, things of that nature. But there is wastes that are what we call orphaned waste. There are some that have some constituents that have some issues that we're still working through. How do you deal with them? And generally we just set those aside until we can find a solution for them. So, there is, from a disposal perspective, there are government disposal facilities, like at Nevada, can take a certain amount of waste. There are commercial facilities. My company, EnergySolutions, has a a low-level waste disposal cell out in Nevada or out in Utah, and we take waste from every DOE site, to help with the cleanup programs. Some of it involves, not to belabor the point, but some of it involves, there's a political aspect to it. The states are involved. We're dealing with 56 million gallons of radioactive waste out at Hanford. That waste is considered high-level waste. Most of it isn't high-level waste, but there is a particular determination because it came from the defense side of the house, was reprocessed. It should be high-level waste, but the radionuclides would tell you it's low-level waste, much of it. So working through these, what seem like easy problems to solve, they're bureaucratic, they're state involved, so there's a lot of those type of things that take a while to get the cleanup done.
Now, can you maybe explain for folks why we're focused on, you say we're storing our waste. Why are we not reprocessing and reusing this waste?
See, you're going to try to get me in trouble. It's a great question. Other countries do it. Japan did it. Yeah, France, England. We used to do it for a short period of time. We certainly did it for the weapons program, right? We had 9 reactors at Hanford, 9 at Savannah River, and the reactors created plutonium, and we reprocessed to draw out the plutonium. For your audience who may not know this, I mean, if you do reprocess, generally, 96% of what you would reprocess from spent fuel would be recovered uranium. 1% is plutonium, and then 3% is actual waste. So it's a really good question. Why don't we just do that and keep reusing the uranium? You can secure the plutonium. It's just, it's not a law, but, we've had a policy in the country because, we're concerned about proliferation, that we wouldn't reprocess. There was a signal we sent, started in the Carter administration, in which we wouldn't recycle fuel. We wouldn't reprocess fuel.
Doesn't by virtue of not reprocessing, doesn't that create significantly more waste, correct?
It does. Essentially, you have the spent fuel that doesn't have anywhere to go. We were building Yucca Mountain at one point because, all the science said it was perfectly fine to dispose of this in a deep geologic repository. That's where most nations are going with their used fuel, their spent fuel. We couldn't get it done politically here. So right now, that's spent fuel from commercial reactors and some in the DOE and NNSA space. They're just stored temporarily, intermediately and temporarily, however you want to call it, in casks, big casks, very safe. But with no long-term home at the moment. So, it is an interesting question. As we talk, on the sort of the new nuclear side, not the weapons side, but what are we going to do about climate change? Carbon-free, society and all that sort of stuff. And nuclear, people are recognizing you need more nuclear. We probably need to double the capacity of commercial nuclear power in this country. Some of those fuels are, some people are proposing fuels that come from reprocessed spent fuel or used fuel. So there's an interesting dynamic happening that it'll be interesting to see where we go as a country.
So for those who, there have been, I think I read an article here recently about, there was some small release at Los Alamos, gloves had a hole or in one of the boxes, something to that effect. I don't remember the article offhand, but for you as somebody who cleans these sites and, how long of a process is this? And is there, if I talk to Greg Mello, who's, he runs the Los Alamos study group, and they're opposed to nuclear weapons. They want to see them, and they see an environmental problem here. Can Greg and his organization and his members be confident that we can, safely clean, any waste that's in these facilities at Los Alamos or, at Livermore or, you pick a facility. Is that something we can have significant confidence in?
Well, I believe so. Yes. But that also comes, I haven't talked to Greg in many, many years, probably since I was in NNSA. You need to recognize that the nuclear waste, some of it has a long life, right? Long radioactive life. It has to be put somewhere, stored somewhere. It comes from the ground. It makes sense to put it back into the ground, to some degree. But my company, for instance, we're at the moment we are decommissioning, four reactors around the country, right? Commercial. And those have a lifespan of, 8 to 12 years to get those things done. We actually own, if you can believe this, we actually own 3 Mile Island 2, which was the reactor that had the accident. We own it. We're cleaning it up. We didn't own it originally. We bought it from the utility to clean it up. So you wouldn't take that risk. A company wouldn't take that risk if they weren't confident it could be cleaned up. So yeah, I have full confidence Los Alamos and Hanford and parts of Y-12 and all that, they can be cleaned up. It's just a matter of the timing and how long do you want to take to do it. Rocky Flats is a great example. That had a 70-year life. It wasn't going to be cleaned up to 70 years until the government and the stakeholders and the contractors all came together and said, let's get this done in 5 years. And it got done. That's a matter of time and money, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of it's a what matters to you question. And
exactly.
And the money question is always one that sort of perturbs me, just because as I look at, in the last 2 years, we've borrowed $6 trillion, for COVID related stuff. And yet I get told that 50 billion a year is just unaffordable. And so I'm fairly good with math, and those two things don't add up. And so it seems, like with the challenges of, we're not on schedule to build the 80 pits a year that we've planned at Los Alamos, and trying to build some of the facilities at Savannah River and Y-12 and some of it is it's labor shortages. It's all a whole host of issues, but I would imagine that the cleanup process can also be a challenge to, as you've sort of mentioned, all the, it's like Eisenhower said, the plan is nothing, planning is everything. I can imagine that you too would find staying on schedule challenging because of all of these intervening variables that can, slow you down or cause problems. What would be the big challenges that can sort of intervene to make it harder to stay on schedule?
To be honest, there are technical challenges that certainly come up that make it difficult. But at the end of the day, it is a little bit of focus and budget and prioritization.
Yeah,
kind of like you implied. There's only so much that's going to go towards NNSA and the DOE cleanup program, which all are within the same DOE budget. Places, some places like Los Alamos, they have a mission and, they have a long-term mission. Their focus is probably there. They still have cleanup and they still do it diligently, but, which one has a bigger focus for them, right? Similarly, if you look at just the environmental management program, sites, Hanford, Portsmouth, Paducah, there's only so much money to go around on an annual basis, right? So to some degree, some people like that because there's jobs there. So, it's going to get done, but, maybe it's better if it gets done in 20 years versus 10. Almost all these sites could be cleaned up faster. The pathways are mostly there. the technology is mostly there. There certainly is more you can do in technology to speed things up, to solve some particular challenges, but they could all be done quicker. But there's only so much to go around. So in my view, that's the biggest challenge. I'm not sitting here saying we should be doubling the size of the budgets, but you could do the focus type of effort like you did with Rocky Flats and some of those other sites for some of the other sites. But everyone likes to have their piece, and and I understand that. It's people's lives, that we're talking about too.
So as we end the show, if I could give you the floor to offer, your takeaway for the listeners, what would your sort of big takeaway or important information be to pass on to the NucleCast audience?
So trying to tie it all together, I would say, the industry is changing, right? And, from when I joined NNSA, from my very early career in defense programs to when I came back in NNSA, NNSA has changed a lot to where it is today, and the type of people that are there and everything else is different. A lot of those people have gone over to the cleanup side, or maybe they've gone to the DoD side. But there is a strong, stable nuclear industry that can feed off of each other and can help each other. Again, I work for a company today that is principally what you'd call a cleanup company, but we're helping the enabling mission of NNSA, Los Alamos and Livermore, and helping clean up the waste and things like that allows that to move forward. So I think that's a very positive thing there. And I think, and even commercial practices that can come in. I think the biggest challenge that I think that I see happening with our deterrent, with our defense establishment and structure is getting the people, right? Getting the STEM-based people, the people who want to work the time and the effort and the hours, who want careers in this field. Because it's challenging work. It's hard work, and it's not always in the best locations, So I think that's a challenge. I mean, we all know each other. I can give you so many examples of people I work with in the early 90s that I work with again today. People who at one point were cleaning up or building the MOX facility at Savannah River now is my project manager at 3 Mile Island. Yeah. So the network's there, the people are there. We really have to figure out moving forward, in addition to the policies and a lot of the things you focus on, the sort of the structural stuff associated with keeping our deterrence going, is we got to find the people. We got to get the young generation interested in this again. And I think that's, that's kind of the global challenge for us.
All right, David Campbell, Executive Vice President at EnergySolutions and the former Associate Administrator of NNSA. Thanks for joining us on NucleCast.
Thanks, Adam. It was a lot of fun.
And thanks to you, the listeners, and we'll see you on the next episode of NucleCast. Well, interesting topic. When you think back in your afterthoughts about a discussion on nuclear waste cleanup, my initial thought was to go to Rocky Flats, but there's still so much that's going on as we try to clean out facilities from Los Alamos, put new equipment in those same buildings. And then the challenges you have, like at Los Alamos, because they're geographically limited on the mesa. And so there's just a lot of interesting stuff going on. And when you think about cleanup or waste disposal, and you think about, why don't we reprocess? And so it was just kind of an interesting conversation with David, that it was a topic I don't think about all that often. And so I found it sort of informative and helping to fill some gaps for me. So hopefully you'll find it similar.
This has been a production of the ANWA Deterrence Center. Our executive producer is Kimberly Charrington, and this episode has been engineered and mixed by David Crumthal. Follow the show on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at NucleCast. Listen, follow, and review the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.